Good afternoon to all of you. Happy Sabbath day to you. Well, you know, we live in a chaotic world, an upset world, and we have all kinds of things that are really out of the ordinary. And for example, we have this pandemic, and it doesn't seem like the so-called experts really know what to do about it. I mean, you have one set of people that say do this and another say do that. And I heard a doctor recently said that eventually we're all going to get COVID, whether it's the variation or some new variation. We're all eventually going to get it. Well, I don't know if that's true or not, but that's the opinion of that doctor. Then we have the Afghanistan fiasco. If you've been following that, you probably shake your head if you know anything about planning and logistics and military operations and so on. I mean, it's mind-boggling what has happened there. I mean, it's just amazing. I know some military people who are just shaking their head. They say, I just can't believe this. I just can't believe this. And they keep saying it over and over. Anyway, today I would like to just review what we should be doing as children of God, followers of Jesus in this troubled times. I'm probably going to read some scriptures that are familiar to you, but that's the way it goes. You know, repetition is a good teacher. So if you turn to Matthew 13. Now, Matthew 13 is part of the Olivet prophecy that Jesus gave. And I'm going to read it from a different version than you have, probably, NASB. The NASB is an excellent version. And the reason I'm going to read from that is that in the booklet we wrote, UCG wrote, called Are We Living in the Last Times? They used the NASB in the last chapter, and I'm basing my message a little bit on that last chapter. So in Mark 13, I'm going to start in verse 28, and of course I'm leaving out everything that went before, and I think most of us are familiar with the things that are mentioned there. It mentions troubles of all kinds of sort, religious deception, wars and rumors of wars, betrayal even in the church, and many other terrible things that are to come. But let's pick it up in verse 28. And I just remembered I can't read it from there. I want to read it from my notes because this is not the NASB. So it says, "Now learn the parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near." So this verse tells us we should be watching, and I guess we need to go get a fig tree and watch it, right? No, he doesn't mean that. I mean, of course we know he doesn't mean that. He means watch what is transpiring in this world. And just like when you see the fig tree making these changes, you know that the fruit is coming. And so we know the things that are happening in the world show us that things are coming together and are going to happen. And then let's pick it up in verse 29. "Even so, you too, when you see these things happening, recognize that he is near," that is the return of Christ, "right at the door." And of course, we're not told the exact time, but it says it's at the door, it's close. Next verse says, truly, verse 30 says, truly I say to you, this generation will not pass until all these things take place. So is he talking about the first generation that he was speaking to? Well, we know that he wasn't. And we know he wasn't by the simple fact that some of the things that he talks about could not have happened back then. For example, man did not have the ability to wipe himself off the earth back then. It just wasn't possible. But in our present world, it is possible. It really is. I mean, when you think of all the nuclear bombs that all kinds of people have, and we don't know, to tell you the truth, we don't know who all has it. There's lots of nations that have it, unreliable nations. So anyway, that's what he was speaking about, the generation in which all of this is possible to happen. That's the generation that shall not pass. Verse 31, heaven and earth will pass away, but my word shall not pass away. But of that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but the Father. And some people say, well, he says we don't know the day and the hour, but could we know the month and the season? The truth is no. That's really an idiom. An idiom, it means you don't know the time. You know, he says day and hour, but you don't know the exact time. If you knew the day and hour, then you'd know the exact time. He's saying you don't know. That's the message there. And then verse 33 says, take heed, keep on the alert. And this is kind of unique to the NASB. Your King James probably says watch. But the NASB says, take heed, keep on the alert, for you do not know when the appointed time will come. It is like a man away on a journey who, upon leaving his house and putting his slaves in charge, assigning to each his own task, also commanded the doorkeeper to stay on the alert. The NASB repeats it. The next verse, therefore be on the alert, for you do not know when the master of the house is coming, whether in the evening, at midnight, or when the rooster crows, or in the morning. In case he should come suddenly and find you asleep, what I say to you, I say to all, be on the alert. So I'm going to repeat that some later. Be on the alert. 4 times this version says, be on the alert. The King James, I think, says, watch. So when it says be on the alert, what are we supposed to be on the alert for? Well, we know that there are 2 things. Number one, we need to watch what's happening in the world, and we need to watch what's happening in here to our own spiritual life. We need to watch that as well. So actually, we shouldn't be all that surprised of what decisions are being made today, even in this country where we're supposed to be free. Some of the decisions made, as I said earlier, just boggle people's minds. They can't believe them. But let's turn to Isaiah 3, and we're going to read there. And Isaiah 3 will show us exactly why these things are happening. And you will see in Isaiah 3, 1 through 4, that it tells us why these things are happening, why we have this chaos, this confusion, this lack of leadership. Isaiah 3, verse 1, for behold, the Lord of hosts, takes away from Jerusalem and from Judah the stock and the store and the whole supply of bread and the whole supply of water. Now, the first thing you might think, well, that's Jerusalem and Judah. We don't really have to worry about that, do you? Well, if you're familiar with what the Bible says, what happens to Judah happens to all Israel. And what happens to all Israel eventually happens to all the world, really. But this does apply to all of Israel. So it applies to us because we are Israel. You know, the New Testament says we are the Israel of God. And so this applies to us, and it applies also to this country because we are physically, we physically stem from the tribes of Israel. Verse 2 says, these things he's going to take away, the mighty man, the man of war. And we've just seen that recently. The mighty men and the men of war have made some awful decisions lately, some awful decisions. You know, in the U.S. military, we have this thing, we leave no one behind. You know, that's a saying in all the military, we leave no one behind. But that didn't happen this time, did it? And it says the judge, the prophet, the diviner, and the elder. And you know, you can pick out any one of those and say the judges of this land are not men of wisdom. So many of them are just not. It's amazing to me that judges are more or less appointed, or are they elected? I think they're elected, but I think people who vote for them don't know anything about them. I mean, it's mind-boggling there, too. Then verse 3 says, the captain of 50, the honorable man. I pause on this because there's so few honorable men nowadays. They really are. The counselor, the skilled artisan, the expert, enchanter, and some translations in that last phrase, they emphasize the expert enchanter. In other words, expertise is being taken away. Not that we need many enchanters, and that word enchanter could mean something else. I'm not sure. But then verse 4, read this verse. I will give children to be their princes, and babes shall rule over them. Now, have you seen any babes in the White House lately? I haven't seen any babes ruling over nations. So what does this mean? This doesn't really mean, it's not to be taken literally. It means that the men and women we have in leadership they act like children. They act like babes. They act like they have no common sense. And that's what it's talking about. And this is the reason that we're having such trouble and chaos today. And I don't want to be political and talk about one party or another, but you know, lately it's getting worse and worse. Here's a few examples of things that have happened that are really strange and mind-boggling as well. For example, we're letting thousands of illegals into the country, and they're not being properly vetted. We don't know who's there. And that's a recipe for disaster. That's one of the reasons that Rome fell, is that they had many foreigners in their country, and they caused all kinds of trouble and problems. And then, for some strange reason, we've decided to shut down the production of oil. Now, if you don't think that is stupid, it's really bizarre. As an example, there are over 6,000 products made from petroleum. And if I were a betting man, I bet I could interview each one of you, and I would find all kinds of things you have. Even some of them you're wearing are made from oil. Lots and lots of things. If you're wearing shoes, I know I could. So anyway, what I'm saying is it's bizarre that we would cut back on the production of petroleum when at the time we were self-sufficient. I mean, it's doubly nuts. And then how about out-of-control spending? You know, they're talking about trillions of dollars being spent on different things, some of which we do not need. And I don't have the time, but I could tell you, give you some stats to illustrate how much $1 trillion is. It would boggle your mind, really. Well, I'll give you one stat. If you took $1 trillion in $1 bills, put them end to end, how far into space would it go? Would it go to the moon? Yeah. Would it go to the sun? Yeah. It would go something like 6 million miles past the sun. It would go 96 million miles. Well, wouldn't go 6 million, about 3 million. It would go about 96 million miles into space if you could do such a thing. Anyway, let's turn to Leviticus 26. And Leviticus 26 will show us again why these things are happening. And again, I want to read in a different version, so I'll wait till you get there and I'll read from my notes. Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28 are both blessings and cursings. And the first part of Leviticus 26 lists all the blessings for obeying God. And hopefully we've read that many times because that part is good to read. But notice what happens in verse 26. Then will I do this to you, meaning if you do not obey. If you do not obey, then I will do this to you. I will visit your panic. I visit you with panic, with wasting disease, fever, and consume the eyes and make the heart ache. And you shall sow your seed in vain, for your enemy shall eat it. And that applies to an agricultural nation, but we're not strictly agricultural. This means that our products that we make, we don't get to enjoy them, and we send them off to other countries and different things. We don't enjoy what we make, and we don't make that much anymore. Verse 17. And I will set my face against you, and you shall be struck down before your enemies. By the way, I wanted to make a mention of the word panic. The panic is loosely connected with pandemic. It's not directly connected, but it's loosely connected with pandemic and pandemonium. That's what we have now, panic, pandemonium with the pandemic. Verse 17, those who hate you shall rule over you, and you shall flee when none pursues. And if in spite of this you will not listen to me, then I will discipline you sevenfold for your sins. And I will break the pride of your power, and I will make your heavens like iron and your earth like bronze. Speaking of weather, and speaking of breaking our pride, we left Afghanistan with our tails between our legs, in effect. And that's what some of the military men are complaining about, is the way that we left. Anyway, I need to move on here. I'll just read Luke 21:36 to you. You won't have to turn there, and I want to read it in the NASB. It says, but keep on the alert at all times, praying that you might have strength to escape, not that you become worthy to escape, strength to escape all these things that are about to take place and to stand before the Son of Man. So as to conclude, I want to give you 3 short points. Number 1, be on the alert. Number 2, watch world events and our spiritual condition. And number 3, always keep your relation with God as priority 1. That's the most important thing. And now I'd like to give you a little homework, if you don't mind. I'd like you to read all of Leviticus 26 and all of Deuteronomy 28. And when you read those, you won't be confused by what's happening in the world. You will know it's because of what it says in those chapters.